Well, thank you very much. And it's not good morning anymore. It's a good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank the organizing committee, and particularly the Lifebold NYU group, for organizing this relatively rare type of symposium, which is focused primarily on addressing the patients rather than the doctors, which is very important, obviously. So the most important challenges you've heard about this morning in organ transplantation is how to get more organ to transplant, how to expand the donor pool, how to, excuse me, how to increase the function of the functional life of the transplanted organ by patient management, how to improve immunosuppression and to reach functional tolerance and minimize drug toxicity at the same time. Obviously, to do all this, we need public support, we need public interest and dedication to get this going. I have no interests or conflicts of interest. Now, in order to define what is a celebrity, I looked to the dictionary, and really there are many definitions, most of them concerned with fame, but really the celebrity is a person who's known for his well-knownness, which is something that I found in the book by Burston. Now, celebrity illness is really an issue of what does it mean? What does it tell us about sickness and health? Well, it tells us a lot. It tells us about diagnosis, about treatment, about management and outcomes. And what it also does, which is very important, it offers either hope and fear sometimes. So when you read about celebrity illness, there is an issue of fear that comes up. And also, if things are going well, there is hope. There is also the issue of truth and myth, whether the facts that are presented are real facts and whether they reflect on your illness, or whether that creates a myth, and sometimes not only a myth, but unfortunately, false hopes, which are really very bad. Why is there such a preoccupation of the media and the public with celebrity illness? Well, that's obvious primarily because the TV and the press want to sell either time or sell the newspapers. So it's a matter of interest, and sensationalism sells papers. So this is really quite important. And the last question is, has it influenced health policy and funding? And I wouldn't be here if it didn't. Obviously, I feel that it does. So down below here, you can see some of the people that you're familiar with: Fox with Parkinsonism, President Eisenhower with ileitis, Alonzo Mourning with a renal transplant, which I did in 2003, and which really stimulated this talk, as you'll see. And the last one is Rita Hayworth, whom some of you may not know, was one of the most beautiful actresses in the 50s and 60s who had early onset Alzheimer's and really initiated the whole field of investigation and publicity about Alzheimer's disease, which was then compounded by other famous people like President and others. Now, the social changes and cultural changes that are related to celebrity influences really started in the 20s with the advent of development of tabloid press and the radio, advertising, public relations, and really the idea put out by Barnum is that there is no bad publicity. So, and this is something that has grown since that time. And one of the original developers of benefit, who didn't benefit from it, was Lou Gehrig with ALS disease. Now, the growing attention of medical science accompanied this development of the interest in celebrity illness. And there was the rising cult of celebrity. Despite HIPAA, anybody who was sick and who was willing to speak about their disease was immediately publicized in the newspapers, TV. Nowadays, it's mostly in social media, as you know. So the tabloid journalism really and sensationalism made a big deal of this, as did the growth in PR industry. And the physician-patient confidentiality took a blow from this thing. But despite that, as I will try to demonstrate to you today, in this case, the benefit may outweigh the risk, and it has to be done very gently and carefully, obviously. Now, here I just want to show you some of the things that we have found in primarily at Columbia, but these were the press releases that we dealt with. This is one that New York Times had about multiple transplants where there were exchanges at this so-called the board where we had 4 exchanges simultaneously, and that was relatively new at the time. So we had 2-page spread about this, and that mobilized a lot of donors for a short time. It was only really for about 2-3 months. There was an increase in donors, population in this area. At the same time, you have to realize when there is any kind of TV show where a heart is dropped and not used, there is a decrease. The publicity can be negative. This is Alonzo Mourning, and this is the press about him, and that spread all over the world. And the important thing to point out here is that this mobilized efforts and recognition of FSGS, some of you may have it, and mobilized not only the interest in the disease itself and diagnosing it, and led to people recognizing that foamy urine with protein in the urine is really significant and should alert them to go to a doctor. But also the fact that he was transplanted successfully with a living donor mobilized, again, living donations and the interest in the disease. Now, at the same time, something like the transplant between unrelated school friends mobilized the effort of this area, at least, and also some degree nationally, to use the unrelated donors like wives or friends at an equal level to those that are related, blood relatives. So there are major advantages in having this type of press releases. Now, what are the consequences? The obvious ones are listed here, and that is that the popularization of the orphan diseases, for example, FSGS or ALS or anything else, the information part is such that it not only popularizes the diseases, but also outlines what the disease is, what it calls, but it should not be really diagnosed by Google at this point. It only prompts the patient or should prompt the patient to seek medical attention. So it brings, now the idea of having a rush to cure can be for good or for bad. And that only means that the rush, if it's on the basis of treatment, on the basis of controlled trials and so on, and on medical indications and physicians' advice, is a good thing. On the other hand, the bad thing is that if there is a degree of charlatanism, such as particularly in cancer, where artificial medications are being recommended, and herbs, and also Latril in the case of McQueen, for example, an actor, it can be very harmful, in fact. The most important thing in all these consequences of publicity is increased funding for research. And that certainly is there. It's also increased funding for management, for outcome studies. And that does improve both the philanthropic contributions as well as the government contributions. There is an increase in resources, as I mentioned to you before, when a celebrity receives a transplant, it really does increase the organ donation for at least a short time. On the other hand, if a patient receives an organ through a subterfuge, like Mickey Mantle did receive his liver once upon a time, it changes also the rules of the game, and the government becomes alert to these things, as it did, for example, with the Pittsburgh series of many transplants that were distributed in a haphazard way, to be kind. Actually, the rules were established on how to distribute organs fairly and equitably. So there are major advantages. It also removes stigma and improves understanding by the public. So it removes stigma of the disease itself, because once you identify with a celebrity, it becomes much more visible and acceptable to the public. The issue of fostering charlatanism I mentioned just before. Now, there is a myth of celebrity influence. So we always have to ask, why do we do this? Why are we so interested in celebrity diseases? Well, the celebrities bond with the public, particularly with the vulnerable, but also with everyone. With or without public relations, we try to sometimes to identify ourselves with the celebrity illness, so we can mimic and accept the disease much more readily, since these heroes that we have previously thought of as being really distinguished by their accomplishments and thereby awards, either be it in movies or in sports or in anything really, seem to be their own bosses. They're masters of their own fate, and we would like to identify with them in that sense, so that they exude power in many instances. And in that sense, they give us reassurance that we can also be like them, so to speak, even though we have the disease. So this kind of allure of the celebrities really depends on two myths, and that is the autonomy and the power. And this was described by this fellow Leo Bredi very, very, very well. Now, once the issue of publicity comes up, is it how do we remember people? And that really depends on who is telling the story, where it is being told, why is it being reported in a certain way, and where is it reported? And what one of my colleagues once said in his lecture, what we remember and forget is not accidental. And so I wrote that down, and I think that that is really very true. So this is very important, how it is told, where it is told, and why is it told, and by whom it is told. And so I want, in the next 3 slides, I just want to show you the story of Alonzo Mourning, who stimulated this talk. And as a celebrity, so Alonzo Mourning as a celebrity, as many of you probably know, was a very well-known basketball star who did everything. He was an All-American at Georgetown. He had gold medal in the famous team that won the gold medal at Olympics. He was an NBA All-Rookie and then All-Star 7 times. And the only thing he'd never got was a championship NBA and that was and didn't get a championship in the NBA until he got the transplant. And I'll show you that in a second. So as a patient, however, this story is a little different. And that is where we take interest in, particularly in that Alonzo Mourning was willing to share his whole story right from the start. So he developed FSGS, which is focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. It's a disease that can recur and does recur sometimes. And so he developed this in 2000, and by 2003, he had to retire from being in championship team. He had to stop making a living, essentially, and he needed a transplant. He got a transplant from his cousin, who was very tall and had in fact a very big kidney. And after the transplant, he rejoined the team. He returned to basketball. And that was one of the big questions about, can he return to basketball? And that became a very easy answer, because as soon as he regained strength, and he was very active post-transplant in terms of rehabilitation, once he regained his strength, all we had to do was get him a cover made by Nike to cover and protect his kidney so he could play. And then he eventually went to the Miami Heats, and they won 2 championships in a row at that time. So that was the story of Alonzo, and his publicity. The question in terms of what he had to decide was, should he tell? And he decided to do that. And he focused on the disease entity itself. And not only that, but elaborated on it very much, to the point of informing the public of all the problems that can arise and how to manage it. And so he exemplified the diagnosis, the treatment, and most importantly of all, became a strong spokesman for need for organ donors, particularly endorsing living donations. And with his success, managed to really bring a lot of attention to not only the field of transplantation, but to FSGS and to our hospital, I must say. So once the disease and treatment became public knowledge, it became a big draw for further advances. The celebrity choices really is they have to manage not only the disease, but how it is presented. And the issue really there is what happens and what is reported are frequently divergent. So in order to present things properly, particularly nowadays with the high extent of false information and really problems in terms of presenting the truth as compared to sensationalism, as you can see more in politics now than ever before, is this happens in medicine as well. And in terms of reporting the diseases, the issue is to have accuracy. So that is a very important aspect of having accuracy in terms of presentation. And obviously, reports on TikTok or some of the other social networks are really not accurate enough. Reports, on the other hand, by presentations by Lifebulb on their website or by the societies, ASTS, ATS, these are the ones that you can count on as being screened and checked and actually being accurate. And that's where the reports are really much more reliable than they are in the standard press. So you have to do this with a grain of salt. And newspapers, it's a little easier because there is a check system, but in social networks, it's not. The oversimplification by the press to keep readers going with words like cure, triumph, tragedy, breakthrough, there are no nuances in these things. And this is really sensational, that really does not provide benefit to the advertising or publicity of celebrities' diseases. The myth making, so the stories become the definite accounts, and there again is the problem with being romanticized, glorified, and inaccurate. So accuracy is really the most important thing in all these reports, and that's hard to find unless you're going to the professional websites. And in order to avoid all this, we have to remember what the proof in medicine is, and that is, in order to really have the truth and the accuracy, it should be based on evidence-based medicine. So that's randomized controlled studies. Meta-analysis is less accurate because this is a compilation of smaller studies, evaluate particularly statistically, and is a little less accurate, certainly, than any randomized controlled studies. And the last one, the least accurate, is the one about celebrity illness, success or no success, so-called anecdotal cases when actually N of 1 or 2 is another problem in terms of interpretation. It may lead actually sometimes in the very rare diseases to clinical trials or studies, but in itself is really inaccurate, except for example in transplantation, where this case of 1 is a repeated episode in many ones. So once you reach that, then it's a little bit more, and it becomes a matter of meta-analysis. The same applies to the experience of patients or relation with relatives or friends. Having their recommendation is not reliable, and experience of celebrities can be reliable if it's repetitious, but you have to worry about it when they advertise drugs on TV, for example, where they're paid. where the accuracy is certainly non-existent. The other problem that with celebrity illnesses is sometimes in experimental treatments of celebrities, really it is unfavorable, as it was, for example, with the original heart transplant in Barney Clark. And this just shows you Dr. Kolff with the artificial heart, the inventor of the artificial heart. And this is Dr. DeVries, the surgeon who put it in Barney Clark. And they did that prematurely with a false hope. And really, it was unfair and harmful to Barney Clark. It was unfair and it was done with permission. And he was a dentist, so he actually knew what he was doing in some ways. And but it was unfair to the public because it raised hopes that were really wrong. And it really was, the preliminary reports gave fame for the doctor, gave DeVries a cover on Time magazine, but it was really a placebo to the other patients who had to wait for about 15 years to get the left ventricular assist device actually useful to maintain life with a failing heart. So this idea of rushing back to your office and order it for patients before it stops working is not a very good idea, but does occur. And this is one of the really failures of public relations in this deal. Now we have to turn, there are also, the celebrities have another advantage, is they have usually a lot of money for one way or the other, or they can raise a lot of money, so they can organize websites. For example, Armstrong, who won 7 Tour de France, said, and he developed cancer of the testes. He had cancer, had a saying, cancer is the Tour de France of illnesses. And this got very popular. He published books. He raised a lot of money for treatment of cancer. Same happened with Alonzo Mourning in terms of having foundations and also websites. And particularly with someone like Fox, who for Parkinson and became almost synonymous with Parkinsonism in the United States, at least. And now in the foundations, they provide physical and emotional practical advice. For example, Armstrong Live Strong, and it raises money for research in both Mourning and Fox. There is an increase in awareness and maintenance of hope, such as by the tennis star Ash, who died of AIDS. And before that, there was less interest in AIDS. And he managed to raise this to a point where it was of great interest. On the other hand, without the foundations, really relying again on some organizations like Lifebulb or Natural Kidney Foundation, you can also get this type of things. Now, publicity for innovation, this is just quickly, let me run this over. You can see that stem cell research, this can be done by those who have the disease and don't have the disease, famous people. So here you have Mary Tyler Moore for diabetes. She had diabetes. Then you have Fox for Parkinson. You have Mrs. What's her name? Reagan, Mrs. Reagan thing. Mrs. Reagan with Alzheimer's disease for her husband, and Dame Taylor, who really was a big contributor to development of funding and interest in AIDS because of her many friends who had AIDS. She was a big activist in that sense. So their contributions are very important, and they don't necessarily have to have the disease. So in conclusion, let me just summarize quickly, and you can read most of this. So the celebrity illness provides you information about risks and curability, including orphan diseases. Now, without realizing this, you have to think about the fact that it can be both good and bad. It removes stigma and improves understanding by the public and encourages clinical studies, experimentation, but that has the downfall that there may be a rush to cure and increases funding, which is really a repetitious advantage of this. It does challenge the doctors because nowadays, when patients come to the office, they can quote what they read in the paper and try to even demand the same treatment. So the joint decisions about treatment have become paramount and probably correct, and it also may foster charlatanism. So with this, I will stop. This is an abbreviated talk, which is already too long, and I welcome your questions.